We are here in the second week of the 119th Congress with enormous work to do. We have a border to secure, we have streets to make safe, we have an economy to resurrect, we have, in short, a great nation to rebuild. And nothing could be more central to that rebuilding than the strengthening of the American family. And nothing could be more urgent for our future than the revival of the American working class. And those two things, Madam President, go precisely together. The truth is, we have been living these last 40 years or so in the great American decline. Our economy has declined. We were once the manufacturing and trade capital of the world. Everybody wanted to trade with us. We were the envy of the world in every possible way economically. That's not true any longer. Now we are a debtor nation. Our standing in the world has declined. We were the leader of the free nations not so long ago. Now the nations of the world rush to court China and regard the United States as yesterday's news. Our cities have declined. They're not safe. Our health has declined. Our hope for the future has eroded. And all the while, this town has plowed ahead with the failed policies of the last 40 years. This town has assured us that everything is fine. We only need to spend a little bit more, issue a little bit more debt, give our giant corporations a few more tax breaks, maybe get involved in another foreign war or two. This town has pursued the projects of the governing class and neglected the weightier matters, the well-being of our families and of our working people. And Madam President, let's be honest, my party, the Republican Party, has too often in these years been part of the problem. The Republican Party has too often spoken up for corporate interests rather than for the interests of families. The Republican Party has too often cooperated with a corporate agenda rather than an agenda to empower workers. We need a change in this town. We need a change in this Congress. We need a change in this party. And that is the opportunity that we have in the moment before us. Because I submit to you, Madam President, the fact is this: you can measure the strength of a nation in the strength of its families. And you can study the struggles of a nation in the struggles of its working people. And right now, our families and our working people in this country are struggling. There was a time not so long ago in this country when a man who got a high school degree and then got a job and then worked at it decidedly and learned a skill and worked hard and saved, where he would be able to provide for a family, start a family, get married, provide for kids, have a future, have something to look forward to. That's just not true anymore. Those days, in fact, are long since gone. During the last 40 years, real wages for working people have flatlined. And during the last 4 years, real wages for working people have declined. Here's just one measure of that. The Bureau of Economic Analysis reports that disposable income, that's income after taxes, fell almost 10% during Joe Biden's presidency. And that was, I might emphasize, for all earners. That drop was even higher, more steep and more devastating for America's working people and for America's working families. The fact of the matter is, there's no such thing as a family wage any longer, not in this economy. Now parents have to work multiple jobs to support just one or two kids if they can afford to have children at all. I mean, let's just think, in the 1960s, the average family had just shy of 4 children. Today, that number has fallen by more than half. And here's the really interesting thing. Families today tell researchers they would like to have more children. To be specific, more than half, approaching 60% of American families tell researchers that they would like to have more kids, but they don't. Why not? Because they can't afford it. And that's all families. The numbers are higher, once again, for working class families. Here's what I would say. There is something fundamentally wrong with an economy where the working people who power that economy cannot afford to have children that they want. There's something fundamentally wrong with an economy when the working people who are the strength and source of all of its might cannot provide for the children they have with the labor of their own hands. But Madam President, that is our reality. That is where we are today. and it is time to do something about it. The test of this Congress will not be what we do for foreign nations. It will not be what we do for our largest corporations. It will not even be what we spend on defense or how we increase the nation's GDP, though those are important priorities. The test of this Congress will be whether we strengthen America's families and whether we deliver for America's working people. Because in those families lies the hope of this nation. And in those working people resides the wellspring of our great national strength. The well-being of our families and of our working people is not one priority among many, I submit to you. It is not one more interest to satisfy. It is a moral imperative. It is our overriding moral obligation, and it is for this Congress a moral test. And for every Republican who went out and campaigned on strengthening families, on delivering for working people, for every Republican who has hailed the new working class coalition that President Trump has assembled, this is the time to deliver. This is the time to stand up and be counted. Rhetoric on the campaign trail is cheap. Delivering actual solutions, delivering actual results here in this body, that's the acid test. And that's where we are today, Madam President. Now, it's time for this new majority, this Republican majority, to stand up and be counted. It's time to deliver on the agenda that we ran on. It is time to realize the promise that our voters have invested in us. It's time to realize the hope for the future that our voters are counting on us to deliver. And to meet that test, to meet this moral priority, we must reshape our nation's tax policy and indeed rebuild our nation's economy around our nation's families. And the surest way to do that is to reform and expand the child tax credit. You know, the child tax credit was first proposed in its earliest form by President Ronald Reagan, who was looking for a way back in the 1980s in circumstances not so dissimilar from ours to deliver real, meaningful tax relief to working families with children. And then in 1994, the famous Contract with America promised what became today's modern child tax credit to deliver, once again, real tax relief for every working family in this country. And now it is time for us, again, to strengthen that pledge and that promise and to deliver new and powerful tax relief for every family that will help strengthen our working families, help put our workers on a firmer foundation, help get our economy working again for the people who make it work for the entire nation. Now, under current law, the child tax credit is available to eligible families with up to $2,000 in tax credit relief per child. Here's my suggestion. Here's my proposal. We should more than double that amount. We should dramatically increase it. We should make it $5,000 per child. And more than that, Madam President, we ought to allow families to apply this tax relief against payroll taxes. Currently, even families who are paying into the payroll tax system, that is, families who have a job, workers who have a job, a mom and a dad who are paying taxes, they can't begin to claim the child tax relief until they meet a certain threshold of income. My view is this: we ought to allow them to start applying this tax relief against every dollar that they pay into the payroll tax system. Most working class families pay considerable sums in payroll taxes, but relatively little in income taxes. And there's a lot of misinformation about this, a lot of misnomers out there, many of them, sadly, repeated by some who call themselves conservatives. We all heard that old saw that 47% of American taxpayers, American workers, don't actually pay into the tax system. That's just not true. Every worker who has a job is paying payroll taxes. That's over 15%. And many of them are paying full freight because they're self-employed or they're gig workers. My point is this: if you've got a job and you're working, you're paying into America's tax system, you're paying payroll taxes. And for families, many working class families, they are paying significant sums in payroll taxes. But because of the increased threshold for income taxes, they don't have a whole lot of income tax liability. So the challenge is, how do we deliver real and meaningful tax relief to these working class families who are paying significant amount of money in payroll taxes, but yet don't qualify for those income tax deductions and benefits that higher earners get? like the home mortgage deduction, for instance. That only kicks in if you are at a certain level of income. For many working class families, they don't qualify for those deductions. They don't qualify for those tax expenditures, but yet they're paying significant sums in payroll taxes every single year. This proposal delivers significant tax relief to them. It allows them to claim tax relief for every child who they are raising as they go out there and they work their jobs. And I would just say to you, this is how it was meant to be. The child tax credit, as it was proposed in its current form by that Republican Congress in the 1990s, as it was proposed in the Contract with America back in 1994, was supposed to be credited against payroll taxes. That was the original proposal. And there's good reason for that. These families are contributing to our economic system, to Social Security and Medicare. They're paying taxes along with everybody else, but right now they're not getting tax relief. The Contract with America was supposed to change that. Madam President, it is time to deliver on that promise. Make the child tax credit available against the first dollar earned in payroll taxes. Here's another change. We ought to deliver the credit to families in regular installments throughout the year. The truth is, many working families can't afford to wait until the end of the year to tally up and figure out how much tax credit they might get back, how much relief they might qualify for. They're paying their taxes in every single paycheck that they earn. It's coming out of their paycheck every couple of weeks or every month. We ought to be returning real tax relief to them in the same increments. So let's make it advanceable. Let's give it to families in installments that they can use across the year as they go out there and earn a living and pay their taxes. And we ought to make the credit available to expecting parents as well. We should say that parents who are expecting children, a child not yet born, ought to be able to claim that tax credit up to $5,000, depending on the amount of payroll taxes that they pay, even if the baby has not yet arrived. Pregnancy is costly. Hospital bills are outrageous, and working families who are expecting children should be able to claim tax relief on the same basis as families with older kids. Madam President, this plan would provide major generational tax relief for working families with children. And I emphasize working. What I propose is not social assistance. It is not social insurance even. It is a tax cut. You have to work a job and pay taxes in order to earn the credit. But under our current system, too many families do work. Under our current system, too many do pay considerable sums in taxes but do not qualify for tax relief in any meaningful way. It is time to change that and make this relief available for working families. And this proposal advances a second important principle as well, and that's the principle that everyone who pays taxes ought to get relief, and relief ought to be available on the basis of family. Now, conservatives have said for years that family is the cornerstone of society. We've said for years that it's the first and irreplaceable building block of our nation. Well, our tax policy ought to reflect that. Our whole national policy ought to reflect that. And we shouldn't shy away from saying that we ought to deliver tax relief and tax cuts on the basis of family formation, on the basis of family size, and yes, on the basis of family need. Madam President, this is only a beginning. There's much more to do. We have years of decline of the American family to reverse. We have years of neglect of the American worker to undo. The challenges are indeed formidable, but this is the moment for the revival that we seek. And so let us not delay. Let us begin. I yield the floor.